magic. He was the best dancer I've ever seen. And we had a cat that always barked. Real nice cat, but afraid of the dark. We left the nightlight on before he went to bed. And we had a cow that said meow. Couldn't figure out why and especially how. All the other animals, this is what they said. You have a farm, a very, very, very silly farm. We have a farm, a very, very, very silly farm. We have a silly, willy, frilly looking farm. And we had a duck, his name was Chuck. I looked outside and he was driving a truck. I couldn't believe my eyes. And we had a dog that hopped like a frog. Ribbit, ribbit, he sat on a log. He just sat there, catching flies. And there was a tomato that tasted like Play-Doh. Went to pick it, it was a potato. It sure was great. And our scarecrow was afraid of crows. Running through the fields, away he goes. He keeps running until it gets late. We have a farm, a very, very, very silly farm. We have a farm, a very, very, very silly farm. It's a very, very merry, silly farm. 'Cause if you're ever on a farm, you gotta look real, real close. 'Cause those silly, silly farms is what those farmers like the most. 'Cause if you're ever on the farm, you gotta look real, real close. 'Cause silly, silly farms is what those farmers